Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Josh with Alzheimer's Breakthrough, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Robby Besner, the founder and CEO of Therasage. Rob's journey into health began as a personal mission to help his own daughter battle chronic Lyme disease, which led him to spend the last 30 years pioneering natural healing technologies. His work has focused on detoxification, infrared therapy, and creating safe home environments to restore the body's natural balance. In our conversation, Rob shares the science behind detox and infrared light, the hidden dangers of toxins and EMFs in our modern world, and he also offers practical steps anyone can take to protect their brain, slow aging, and also improve resilience. This is a fascinating deep dive you won't want to miss. Peace and plants. So it is my distinct pleasure today to introduce Robby Besner, who is the CEO of Therasage. And I'm really excited about this interview. And it's hard to know where to start, but why don't we start at the beginning? How in the world, I mean, you've got a background, I think, in engineering. How did you get into the healthcare field?
Well, I actually have a healthcare background too, and I think that's part of the complement. So engineering, business, healthcare, various different skill sets. I got started in this category that we've dedicated the last 3 decades of my life focused on integrated functional health, natural ways to heal. And it was a passion of mine. I almost lived my entire life that way, but particularly homing in the last 30 years or so, it was a story about my oldest child. My adolescent daughter contracted chronic Lyme disease, and when she got sick, I started to focus on the things that how she was expressing herself. And she had high levels of toxicity, inflammation. She had neurological challenges, and she had thresholds of pain that would come and go. Very, very common in the Lyme community. If anybody's listening that may have touched on that, either in their families or that dynamic. And so unpacking the way she was expressing herself, I focused on all the different areas, and I centered on toxicity, did a deep dive study on the physiology, the biology, the anatomy of detoxification, the way the body systems work, and the best ways and methods to detox. And, there were very invasive forms like dialysis, and then there were less invasive, which would involve either a natural or a synthetic pharmaceutical supplement that would purge or chelate toxins from the body. And then what's the elimination system, the so-called sanitation system or detox pathways that the body has set up to manage this. And that's normal physiology, So anyway, in that study or that search, I discovered, again, this was 30 years ago, that there were frequencies of sunlight that will actually mobilize all the toxins in your body. So a natural chelator, something that happens in nature, the animal and plant kingdom resonates with these wavelengths. I thought, wow, this is, perfect for me. But then when I focused on the available devices that the average public could buy in this category, there virtually weren't any about 25 years ago. But it was being used in the medical community, but mostly in sports medicine. So the sports medicine doctors, player got injured on the field, they'd use infrared in conjunction with other therapies or interventions to lower their pain thresholds and to get their bodies to actually heal at a much faster rate than they would do naturally to get them back on the field. So all those attributes I thought were fantastic. And then the next leg was to try to harness some of this technology. And so I amassed did a study, organized a trip to China, visited 65 factories to basically start developing technology or devices, mostly for personal use, within our family. And her Lyme literate doctors, Dr. Josh, it wasn't quite the same as it is today. There's no telemed. There wasn't any of this virtual medicine as we see it today. So 25 years ago, we had the top Lyme literate doctor who was located on Long Island in New York.
Right.
We were living down in South Florida. And so we had a corresponding doctor that coordinated with the Lyme literate doctor. And then my daughter had a pain management doctor, a general practitioner, a psychologist. Like there was within a short period of time, she had a team of doctors surrounding her. So I know I might be a little long-winded here, but basically this was my entree into developing devices. My daughter had gotten such great responses that all these doctors that had mostly almost 100% of their practices were infectious disease and Lyme disease. They asked for us to start to develop these devices and technologies or protocols with the devices that they can integrate into their practices because my daughter was responding so well. So that was kind of how I got started. And it's been an amazing journey ever since.
Right. So it was basically out of need. You needed to fix your daughter. And at the time, 25, 30 years ago, traditional Western medicine wasn't cutting it. And you basically went back to first principles. And I imagine it was probably frustrating. I mean, do you remember how it felt during that period?
Well, yeah, it was frustrating on so many levels because Lyme mimics many different diseases, okay? And some of them are like MS and PD and are neurologically related diseases.
Parkinson's disease, right? Yes.
Yeah, so the Lyme spirochete, the bacteria that travel with the parasites, actually are some of the few that actually can penetrate through the blood-brain barrier. True. So they can get up into the brain and ultimately they might create seizures, which my daughter did experience a half a dozen of those, but they can actually create fissures in your brain, actual physical brain tissue that inhibits the proper transmission of neurological sparking through the synapses of the various different nerve endings in the brain.
Did they affect the specific neurotransmitters? Is that
exactly? Yeah.
Right. And I've taken care of numerous Lyme patients, and so I know exactly what you're talking about. But I imagine 25, 30 years ago there was even less information around. But the confounding thing I see in many Lyme patients, and I've got to say for the audience here that many of the patients I treat with Alzheimer's, one of the causes is the Lyme spirochete. And what's so complicated, and I know this now because I can test my patients for all these different infections and toxins. But at the time, I mean, kudos to you for figuring this out. How did you do that?
Well, I guess part of the message that I want to give to the audience listening today is to have unwavering, focus on the end game. Don't get pulled aside by the traditional allopathic or medical practices and of the norm these days, because, well, again, 25, 30 years ago, there weren't as many Lyme literate doctors. Lyme really wasn't on the radar. And because Lyme mimics many neurological kinds of diseases, it wasn't even, the doctors didn't ask the right questions, so they weren't making the right diagnoses. So think about that. You go in with the symptoms of MS, but you really have Lyme. So the doctor that may not be aware of that Lyme mimics MS, right, is asking the questions or seeing how you are presenting, right, your symptoms, and then they're giving you a diagnosis and they're treating you for MS and not for the root cause or Lyme. So they're treating for you for what you don't have and not treating you for what you do have. I can't think of a worse combination out there, actually. And that was very problematic. So you ask about frustration. Like for years, they were telling us and my daughter that she didn't have anything. There was nothing wrong with her. There was nothing that was showing up in the blood work because they weren't doing the Western blots and the IGeneX testing to actually discern, because they weren't asking the right questions. It's just about understanding. And then it's not that Lyme hasn't been or didn't proceed in society more than 25 years ago, but it was certainly in its infancy in terms of the medical community embracing Lyme and chronic Lyme. as many as we have today. So back then we were getting, your daughter's perfectly fine. You need to take her to a shrink. She's a hypochondriac. These are just in her head. They're not in her body. And we knew as parents there was something wrong with her. And I knew as a healthcare provider that there was something wrong with her. And so we basically took it upon ourselves, because I realized, Dr. Josh, it's not trivial, but there's a very unique relationship between the chronic patient, their family, their surrounding community that supports them, and their relationship to their team or their individual practitioner. So you see the practitioner maybe 1% of the time, they send you home for 6 weeks, try this protocol, try that protocol. And then come back in 6 weeks. Well, 2-3 years later, and a lot less money in your bank account, you're trying all these things. And I often laugh when I say, okay, doctor, when are you going to stop practicing and actually treating me, not practicing to treat? So I find the language very interesting that we all use and accept commonly. Again, we know a lot more now, but it was very frustrating back then. And we did many of the traditional allopathic approaches using cocktails of very caustic antibiotics to help break down, curtail, slow down the advancement of the replication of the parasites and the co-infections.
And Robby, now we know that when we treat with antibiotics, we're actually, in many cases, busting up biofilm, this biologic film that in this case is in the brain. And when it does that, it releases all these toxins and other infections. And you mentioned at the very beginning detoxification, and with a lot of the protocols I've been using in clinics, you basically need to do detoxification before you give something caustic like an antibiotic to basically protect the patient.
Amen. Amen.
Yes.
And I really wished that more, even today, practitioners that are treating Lyme patients would take that approach, because again, it's back to my belief systems and stuff I've done as a bioresearcher, deep dives into various different technologies and also their net effects on the physiology and the synergistic effect of stacking or combining a few of these technologies in certain sequences to get a more optimal result. And so ultimately, I believe that the reason why you have a symptom at all, almost categorically, is because of inflammation. And what I've discovered in my research about detoxifying is that detoxification, or when you're toxic, toxicity and inflammation sort of travel on the same highway. And so if I could understand and employ the best methods to detox, so I can lower toxic load and burden on the body, and in parallel lower inflammation, then I'm going to lower symptoms. Now, is that treating the root cause? No. But is it giving the patient time, giving them part of their life back, giving them hope, giving the practitioner or groups of, team of practitioner more time to go after root cause? Yes. And so all of that stuff.
So explain this. I'm a little bit confused, because I thought in many cases the toxins are also part of the root cause.
Oh, yeah, totally. Totally. But so let's say you used an antibiotic or any kind of approach that will create a die-off. In an extreme sense, it's called a Herxheimer reaction, which is a flu-like reaction. And for many people that are already toxic, and you give them a protocol that creates a detox or a die-off, the dead carcass of the organism, microorganism, that's a toxin. As you pointed out a few minutes ago, in the process of the die-off, you're breaking down the biofilm. That's a toxin. They're generally emitting a neurotoxin or a biotoxin, or if it's mold that's in conjunction with Lyme, then now you've got mycotoxins that are all being released into the bloodstream. So no matter how you look at it, you're creating a higher toxic event with someone that's already symptomatic. So they're already suggesting that they're toxic and that they have inflammation, hence the symptom or catalog of symptoms, right? So I go back to what you said earlier. It just makes logical, physiological sense to me that before I do anything, I just put my patients and my customers on a gentle detoxification program, lower toxic burden, so that when I start to do some kind of protocol that may go after root cause, that I'm not making it worse before I make it better. And you may have heard this, many Lyme doctors say, well, take this antibiotic, and by the way, you're going to get sicker or feel more sick before you get better. Well, why is that? To me,
actually, what I've seen, because I've seen patients treated with IV antibiotics for months and months and months and months, and if their doctor is not addressing the toxins and the biofilm, what they'll often do is, you give someone Rocephin, an antibiotic, for a month or 2 or 3 or 4, and you're not busting up the biofilm. What you're really doing is you're selecting for resistant bugs, including resistant Lyme spirochetes, that just stay in the biofilm, and they're happy because they can then share these resistance genes with other bacteria, other types of bacteria and parasites in the biofilm. So you need to know what you're doing. So fill us in. What is the norm? And again, I think it's really important for everyone there to understand that this is personalized. This is not one a protocol that everyone gets the same way. I want to know, how do you personalize or recommend people personalize the detoxification protocols or tools that you've put together in your experience?
Well, great question. And really happy to talk to you today in your community because of your sensitivity to these pain points. And it truly is remarkable. My kudos to you, in your own experience and sensitivity to that. And so, okay, so it starts with, how is the patient presenting themselves? Are they very symptomatic? Are they disabled? Like, in our case, like I mentioned, my daughter had cognitive challenges. So I knew that there were already challenges with her condition piercing the blood-brain barrier.
Well, right? she was also seizing too, right?
Yes, but that came later on. Initially, it was other cognitive expressions. She would lose memory for a minute or two, like almost like she was dozing off.
Right.
And then she'd snap up and I go, okay, where'd you go? Then she would have just drifted. It would have been in the middle of dinner, just like this. You and I are talking, and just I noticed that she starts to drift. And then she had no recollection for about a minute of that time where she was. So there were symptoms before. Seizures are kind of extreme, but the most dangerous part about a seizure is losing control and falling and hurting yourself, not the seizure itself. The seizure is just your brain's hard reset, like it was a computer, just hard turning it off and then restarting, because the activity is either too slow or too fast for the brain to process properly. So that's a sort of a short version of what a seizure is.
Sure.
Anyway, so back to her, how I manage it, and I do this sort of categorically. I just ask certain questions. The first have to do with detox pathways. Is the patient slow moving and debilitated? Are they more bedridden because of their condition than sort of being semi-active? Or that could be going for a walk or walking the dog or just getting up and moving around. If they're not very active, then most probably they have a fairly sluggish lymphatic system, which is one of their main detox pathways. The other is a little more primal. Are they pooping? Are they peeing? So those are other detox pathways. And then the most important one, which centers back to the work that we do, has to do with harnessing full spectrum infrared, putting you in a sauna, infrared sauna. And then do you sweat? Because the sauna will mobilize the toxin, but just like before, there's no point to me throwing you in a sauna, mobilizing a toxin, if you don't have the proper detox pathway to get it out. Then I'm really just stirring up the pond, bringing these toxins out. And then now they're in the bloodstream or the blood circulatory system is a closed system. So within minutes, that higher toxic load in the blood will find its way up to your brain. And the brain doesn't really love a new toxic burden. In fact, it gets very sensitive to that and will express itself as, dizziness, nausea, headaches, blurred vision, and possibly hearing impairment just for a short time. But also you could get what's called a histamine response, like itchy skin or stuff like that. These are all the ways that your brain tells you in signs that your cup runneth over with toxins, so to speak, inside.
Right.
So to me, like to your point, I just take the position everybody's toxic. You're living in a toxic world. The waters are toxic and tainted. The foods that we're eating have glyphosates and toxins in them. The air we're breathing is not healthy anymore. So even if you're really religious, eat organic, filter your water, and air filter your home, control that air in your home. You still, you don't live in a bubble. You're outside. You're moving around. There's reasons for your body to get exposed to toxins. So my position is that basically everybody's toxic. Okay. And so
right. And to focus on that, Robby, my understanding with 2 degrees in biochemistry and having worked in this field for a while now is that, sure, we're worried about lots of different toxins, but some of the most insidious to get out of the brain and other fatty tissue are the fatty toxins that can have a half-life of 30 plus years. Is that your understanding too?
Yeah, totally. Including heavy metals and a lot of other things that like to reside in those tissues. And so if you present yourself to me as being very symptomatic, then I may not even do a protocol that I think gets close to mobilizing a toxin. I'll start off with basically a controlled titrating in, meaning slowly increased doses of binders that are essentially like a biosponge. And really what it does is it sort of soaks up the available toxins that are in your bloodstream. And so I know that.
Right. And how will you recommend patients take these binders?
Well, they're generally orally.
Okay.
And we start off, there's 2 classes of binders. One's the macro binder or the big sponge. That would be like a activated carbon or charcoal or a bentonite clay. There are certain superfoods like chlorella, spirulina, blue-green algae that are also food sources that act as binders. So I would start them off with a gentle dose of that, see how their bodies respond. The worst case, and it's happened once in 20 years, that one of our patients got a little bit clogged up or constipated. And that lasted basically less than a day. So it's something on the radar, but not, again, it's very gentle. And then gradually build up the dose to where you dose a little bit in the morning. I'm talking about 2 tabs in the morning and then 2 tabs at night before bed. It's interesting, but between the hours of 12 and 4 o'clock in the morning, if you get into a REM or a deep delta sleep, your brain actually shrinks a little bit, gets flushed with spinal fluid. And so it's actually a detox that's occurring and a regenerative time at night. That's what should happen if you're basically in a vital position. But people that have infectious disease or have chronic challenges, they generally have either bad sleeping cycles, bad circadian cycles, so they don't quite get into that deep regenerative sleep, which is in favor of their chronic challenge, microbial imbalance, and not in favor with their vitality. And so we do analyze their sleep patterns. We do get them on a gentle binder protocol. Getting some of these toxins, lowering that burden, already gives them a little bit of relief. And so we gradually, over the first week or 2, start to increase their dose. And max dose, I'm talking about going from 1 tab to 2 tabs. It's not a big deal. And these aren't expensive methods to bring down toxicity. So now over a week or 2, they're starting to feel a little better. They're maybe getting around a little bit. Then I start talking to them about considering some kind of method to mobilize more toxins. Again, the goal would be to keep bringing your toxic burden down.
Okay.
So that's really the first 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how the patient is presenting themselves. And that might seem like an eternity to you and I or someone that's healthy. But for someone that's chronically ill, they might have been sitting with their symptoms for 10 or 20 years, So the biggest challenge I have there, Dr. Josh, is generally trying to slow the patients down that have these chronic, prolonged symptoms, because they're so sick and tired of being sick and tired that once they start feeling a little better, they have a tendency to kind of overdo it a little bit.
Right. I've seen that. But the other thing I've seen is suddenly you're using these binding agents, you're pushing toxins out, you're reawakening different organs in their system, including the immune system. And then the immune system can suddenly say, hey, there's all these bugs and biofilm. Let me do my job. And then I see patients, go downhill.
Right. And there is kind of, it's not a war against these microorganisms, including Lyme or spirochete. These are organisms that have lived in harmony, in a sense, within our microbiomes for, tens of thousands of years. I mean, they're now finding spirochetes in the sarcophaguses in the catacombs of pyramids. So this organism's been around. And it's really just the imbalance of these microorganisms that creates a challenge and a symptomatic patient per se.
Right. And some of this imbalance is from man-made chemicals that weren't around during the sarcophagi, the ancient Egyptians, etc.
Yeah. And I think it's also an expression of the times we're in and the epigenetic effects of our environment. And so we all have genetic proclivities. We can't change that. But the environment can turn these switches on and off. And so we're seeing a lot of recessive kind of behaviors, gene expressions becoming more prominent in younger people these days because of the environment. And I think that you have to think about the stressors. Again, back to primal healing. We have challenges with our water, our air, and our food supply. And then add in the fourth stressor, which is like the invisible one. That's the exogenous frequencies, like electromagnetic fields, 5G networks, electric cars and bikes, and wireless networks, and all that stuff. When you add that in as another stressor on top of all the other things, I don't know where what the final straw is that breaks the camel back, but it does bring out these recessive tendencies that in prior generations you may never have had. These things never may have come to fruition or surface in your entire lifetime. But now what we're seeing in clinic is 14-year-old women that are showing signs of infertility and men that are 18 years or younger that have low testosterone levels. That's not genetic.
No.
That's the effects of our environment and the choices that people make that influence their genetics. And so we can change a lot of that. So, I mean, it might seem horrendous to think about we can change the environment, but we can change certain things. And when I teach and I present, I talk about creating a safe place like your home where it's free of EMF, or at least you can control it. You can filter your water and air and be a little bit more direct in the food choices, like organic food choices. But even then, you could buy an organic food at, let's say, Whole Foods or something like that, and it's farmed in an area where the soils are depleted because they've been over-farmed. And so you're buying a broccoli, and a dear friend of mine, Dr. Nathan Bryan, who is a famous doctor and specializes in nitric oxide. He did a study and he measured the same amount of broccoli in a dozen different states across the country. And the same amount of broccoli measured, the nutritional value varied dramatically from state to state. So just eating organic isn't enough anymore. You have to think about the supplementation because the natural food sources aren't exactly as nutritious as they may say.
What's the most important exercise you need to do every single day? Sleep. Some people are really good at sleeping. They're the ones you see snoring on airplanes and city buses. They can crash practically anywhere and anytime. The rest of us need some help now and then. That's why I drink Organifi Gold in the evening. It helps me relax and get ready for bed without making me groggy the next day. Plus, Gold tastes absolutely amazing. It's like gingerbread and marshmallows. It's basically my dessert every night, and it has less than 1 gram of sugar per serving. I don't know how they did that, but I'm glad they figured it out. So how does Gold work? It doesn't contain any chemicals or drugs, no alcohol, no sedatives. It's all just natural ingredients that help soothe and calm your body and mind. We're talking about ingredients like lemon balm, reishi mushroom, acacia, passion flower, and more. It doesn't make you fall asleep. It sets you up to fall asleep naturally. That way, you're not screwing up your circadian rhythms. You're actually helping to get them back in harmony. That's the problem with things like sleeping pills. They just knock you unconscious if they do anything at all. It's not restful sleep, the kind that gives your body the chance to recover and repair from the damage of the day. You've got to go through your sleep cycles for that to happen. And despite all our growing technology and AI and everything else, we still have to sleep the old-fashioned way. So, are you ready to make your evenings more relaxing and more delicious by adding Organifi Gold to your nighttime routine? Check this out. Just go over to Organifi.com/Dr. Josh and load up your cart with gold. When you get to the checkout, make sure to enter my savings code, Dr. Josh, DRJOSH, and you'll get an additional 20% off their already low price. The website is Organifi.com, ORGANIFI.com/Dr. Josh. My savings code is DRJOSH. So when you wake up feeling refreshed, renewed, and energized, you'll know you're doing the sleep thing right. It's going to help you get there. Remember, Organifi.com/Dr. Josh, discount code Dr. Josh to save 20% on Organifi Gold for healthy, natural rest. Let's talk about solutions. I don't want to scare the whole audience. Let's talk about solutions now. So, for example, you just mentioned EMF. I mean, I remember back to, college physics, something called a Faraday cage. You basically a metal enclosure, so you can actually be around some pretty strong electromagnetic radiation. But if you're in this shielded Faraday cage, you're safe. Can we do that as people? Is that practical?
Yeah. And I actually started around 17 years ago, sort of on a whim, but it was sort of a recurring dream. Here I am developing what I thought was the best portable infrared sauna on the market, but it was powered by alternating current. That meant that along with delivering these beautiful healing wavelengths of sun energy, it was being delivered by a man-made electrical current that was also generating a field. So again, 25 years ago, I didn't have a clue that the advancement in cell phone industry or electric vehicles, wireless everything, was ever going to, my vision wasn't that. My vision was simply, how do does the body reconcile receiving these beautiful healing frequencies of sun energy that's being delivered by a stressor called EMF. And I didn't really have a clue about how, on a cell level, that would be a stress. But I knew that there'd be a disconnect there. And so what I thought really at that moment was, let me just figure out a way to remediate electromagnetic fields. So that discussion is off the table.
Okay.
And now your body is just receiving the pure energy of sun.
So just so I understand, so this was a problem with the alternating current. You realized in the products that your company offers now, is it shielded from the EMF, and how does that work?
Yeah, back then we were what the latest or most advanced approaches for remediation was what's called shielding or blocking. So we were doing that, and we developed a lot of proprietary ways to do it, and we're still using those today. But what we've done today and have been employing for the last 3 years has been an additional way, which I don't believe anybody is doing, and that's called harmonization. And so shielding and blocking, the problem with that is it's reactive, meaning they come out with 3G networks, and then I dial up my remediation so it meets standards and can protect you from 3G. And by the time I get that in my device and I get it into your home, they're already introducing 4G. And so I'm always chasing the technology. Why is that? Because all the money is in gaming faster and downloading and uploading faster. And again, now electric everything, cars and planes.
I hate to ask, have you heard about we're at 5G now. Have you heard about the 6G protocol? What they're
planning? Well, forget that. Right now, even on a 5G level, and all those haven't been activated, those same microwave towers that are delivering the 3, 4, and 5G are also warehousing the 7 and 10G networks that the military are using. So right now, as we speak, we are swimming in these wavelengths that we can't see, hear, taste, smell. So we really can't react to it. So again, you and I were relatively healthy, yeah?
Right.
But you take a chronic patient that's got cancer or that has Lyme disease, and we're discovering that these same energies, because they oscillate or vibrate at a higher frequency than your body, is actually bringing your body frequency to match or raising your body frequency to meet that higher oscillation. And in doing so, it basically throws off your body electric, which I've been fortunate. We have a close relationship with Dr. Jerry Tennant, and we're doing some work together, who's one of the founding fathers of energy medicine. And so he's taught me a lot, but he understands and analyzes the effect of these exogenous frequencies and body voltage on a cell level, what amount of voltage your cell needs to be healthy and what amount of voltage your cell needs if it's in disrepair and needs to get healthy. And that's a key, I believe, to sustainable health, is really about cell energy, how it has to do with what's called electron donors and electron stealers. So bacteria, viruses, parasites, mold, even normal body function needs a certain amount of energy. And we talk about the mitochondria being the warehouse or the powerhouse of a cell, right?
Right.
Well, where does the mitochondria get its energy from? It's from the earth energy, from the negative ions, or from sun.
Ultimately, and it's my belief that light energy powers mitochondria. Do you agree with that?
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's my body of work, biophoton modulation.
Because some of the actual enzymes in the mitochondria, they're called cytochrome. What does it mean? It's light. I mean, that's in the name of it.
Right. It's light activated genes or mechanisms. Yeah. And so this is my body of work, harnessing full spectrum infrared wavelengths and getting those frequencies into the body to create a whole host of amazing physiological events, including mobilizing all your toxins.
And explain for our audience what you mean by full spectrum.
Okay, good. Well, for people that are, again, just tuning in or just investigating, even going on search engines like Google and want to know about infrared, you'll see a lot of information about the near infrared frequencies versus the far infrared frequencies. As a bioresearcher, what I did was took an approach from sort of a page out of the playbook of nature, and the way nature delivers the spectrum, full spectrum infrared to the earth is actually a whole array of wavelengths from near, mid, and far. And it's almost like a radio station, if you can imagine. Like 105 is R&B, and 107 is rock and roll, and 106.5 is country rock. So each of these wavelengths of sound wavelengths in like a radio station, in light frequencies, they're called nanometers. That's how it's measured. So each of these levels of nanometers actually do different things in the body. And so we prescribe to or subscribe to the same way that nature delivers. We think that the full array is important for the body. The body will discern what it needs, takes what it needs, whatever it doesn't need, lets it go. That's part of the balance and a rebalancing reset that we call homeostasis, just to create sort of a level playing field with all the information and all of nature's inputs. And then the body levels out and tries to take all this information, take all these influences, take all these stressors, and create somewhat of a balanced feeling. So you as an individual can kind of walk through the day and sort of feel a little tired and a little excited, but just on balance, be kind of like a Mazda, humming along, right? And so we have done deep research for the last 25 years, because I started with my daughter, but we started to see how what the great effects of these full spectrum frequencies are. And as the sun delivers it, you have the near frequencies that are great for skin, for mitochondria, support that's cell energy. It's great to produce the natural transient gas called nitric oxide, which helps expand vessels and also triggers your blood to grab more oxygen when it makes it available. So think about that. A wavelength of sunlight will increase circulation that moves DNA, RNA, everything that's in your blood, which includes your nutrition, and oxygen. So one of the reasons why we age is because of oxidative stress. Our blood's ability, our body's ability to hold on to oxygen and deliver it to the tissues starts to go down or diminish as we get older. And it's partially because our body makes less nitric oxide.
Right. And I agree with you there, but help the audience understand. So in the example of your daughter, she's got infections, other things going on in her brain. I understand full spectrum light is great. How do you deliver the light that will ultimately produce the nitric oxide gas? But how do you deliver that within the brain? Because the brain is in a surrounded by a skull. And I guess, you could shine really bright light, but explain to us, how is that bright light getting to the relevant parts of her or anyone's brain to have that effect?
Wow, great. Amazing questions you're asking tonight. I appreciate all of them. I got to step back a little bit and just describe a mechanism. So there are basically two kinds of, let's say, saunas out there. Those are delivery systems. One is what's called a convection heat, and that would be like a hot rock sauna or Swedish steam room. And they are elements that heat up the ambient air. The ambient air touches your skin, raises skin temperature. Eventually, there's a fatty layer of fat under your skin that acts as insulation to protect your insides from extreme temperatures, extreme cold or extreme heat. And so convection heat, like a steam room, has to fight hard to get through that layer, to get inside, to raise your core temperature a little bit, and to create sweating, right? Now, radiant heat, which is the spectrum of sunlight, doesn't heat the ambient air. It actually goes directly to the skin, and then it actually harmonizes or resonates, it vibrates at the same frequency as the water inside of the fat in that insulating layer. Okay? So sunlight in nature can penetrate seamlessly through that layer, start to harbor or vibrate, it's called a bioresonance, vibrate in the most dense parts of our bodies, which is our muscle mass or organ tissue. So yes, the skull and bone is the structurally strongest, but it's also porous. So you want to ask why or how the sunlight gets in.
Right.
Simply, it's resonating, it's completely harmonizing with the body mechanism. So it's designed in nature to come through and start to work on the inside of us, as opposed to those external heats like the steam room or the hot rock sauna. They have to be at 200 degrees Fahrenheit approximately in order to create some kind of event internally.
But can we talk about that? Can I stop you there and just ask, because you may be aware there were studies in, I think, Finland, where they looked at some of the traditional convection saunas there, and they were able to show that people who were, Finland, they're doing sauna every single day, but those people who do, their rate of Alzheimer's was very low.
Right.
So my question to you is, with that information, why should I try an infrared sauna as opposed to the convection, or should I do both if I'm trying to prevent Alzheimer's?
Well, potato. So you're going to sweat in both of those environments.
Right.
But the body is much more attuned to mobilizing toxins and actually creating an internal raise of your core temperature in the infrared environment, as opposed to the Swedish sauna. Yes, that study is an amazing study. It goes along with, neuroplasticity challenges that people have with Alzheimer's and dementia and so forth, but also with longevity. If you do sauna, particularly infrared is most of the science now directs to. If you do infrared sauna 3 times a week, you'll lower cases of diabetes, heart disease, all the major challenges by close to 40%. If you do it 5 times a week, you're looking at decreasing most of the high profile reasons why people die, morbidity, by almost 50% by just doing a half an hour sauna a week. I mean, a day, 5 days a week. And so if you think about it, in terms of like life extension, quality of life, I can't think of a least expensive buy-in than just adding, that small routine of 30 minutes a day using infrared sauna. So the challenge is between convection and infrared is convection will pull out the toxins that are already mobilized or in your bloodstream,
right.
But they won't start to mobilize the ones that are the ones you talked about, the insidious ones that might be in your brain cell, or the deeper ones like heavy metals that have actual what they call covalent bonds, or an ionic bond between the metal and the tissue where it's stored. And so in order to get that out, you really need to get that vibration or that bioresonance to bust up that bond that then releases. So they did a study. I love the studies. They measured a drop of sweat on an same individual in both 3 environments, the hot rock sauna, the sweetest sauna, and the infrared. And the amount of toxins in the drop of sweat, same individual in the infrared sauna, was 85% higher.
Wow.
So we're not just getting available toxins, we're starting to mobilize and pull out the ones that are actually stored. And that's the key to our discussion today. And earlier you talked about Alzheimer's and Lyme disease. And they're now coming out with forensic studies that close to 97% of the forensic patients that they do in cadavers that they actually analyze.
The autopsy. You're right.
Yeah. They're finding spirochetes.
Right.
So it's clearly a contributing factor for the degeneration of cognitive sense.
I agree with you. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. So you've just presented so much. My mind is swimming. If we could go back to, you said in just the last 3 years, in terms of blocking EMF, yes, your company has made an advancement. I mean, obviously, I don't want to know trade secrets, but what?
No, it's key. It's very key. It's called harmonizing. And so I described earlier about being reactive. So I get to 3G, they come out with 4. I get to 4, they up it to 5. So that's going to be because the money is in the advancing in the technology, and the controlling agencies, the FTC, the Trade Commission, and the FCC, Communication Commission. They don't have any health-minded people that sit on those panels. So it's really about the money. Not about how it affects your body. So it's really on us, and mostly on a guy like you to bring me on to talk to, our community as to the things that are out there and the things you can do about it. So shielding and blocking is very effective, but harmonizing, I find.
Actually, before we go there, when I hear shielding and blocking, that scares me, because potentially, like you said, if you don't set it up correctly, you think you're blocking, but you could actually be focusing all that radiation on yourself.
I guess I'd like to think of it differently, that you don't quite get all the coverage. There's a lot of variables. Like, if you live in an apartment building and everybody around you's got 5G networks, like you can remediate your home and put a Faraday cage around your home, but there's still going to be a 5G signal can go half a mile and penetrate through cinder block. And so, again, you can do a certain amount of protection, but we really just kind of slowing it down in a way, create that safe home. So at least for 8 or 10 hours a day, your body can get a hard reset rather than being constantly exposed to it 24/7. And then I think that the potential of you not living as vital as you can or optimally might be greatly diminished. Again, it's just one stressor, but when you start to add up all the other ones, then again, you don't know what is going to be your straw that breaks the camel's back, right?
Right.
I need to let the people out there listening today know about a technology that's called harmonization. And there we've got these energy fields around us. This has been studied for centuries. In the 60s, it was called an aura. So you have this certain aura about you, Dr. Josh, you know? Today's terminology is the biofield. So we have an energy field or network around us. And we're all connected that way. Both the plant and the animal kingdom has this connection. And so harmonization speaks to creating wavelengths or frequencies that support your biofield, your energy field, your shield, your protective shield. And if I could put technology on you, on your body, a pendant you wear, or a card you carry in your pocket, or we have a few different formats we deliver it in, but we call them chips, but they're holograms that I can imprint certain frequencies in that are generating a wavelength that's sort of muting or counterbalancing the exogenous frequencies that are made by these networks.
Is that the same thing as a hologram?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we create these the mediums that can hold these wavelengths, and then they come in different forms, like a hologram. That's a sticker you can put on a device. Now that's generating a wavelength, and we know what they are because we're imprinting those into those cards or onto that medium. And so if we know the bad frequencies and we can neutralize them with good frequencies, now we're building our field. We're preventing and shielding, preventing that by supporting and energizing your own biofield. And it doesn't matter whether you're in 5G, 7G, 10G, whether you're in a room completely filled with technology, your body is going to be somewhat protected. And I think that is the new wave of what I call energy medicine, because I think it's important for us to understand the toxic environment and also the place that these, man-made exogenous frequencies play in as another stressor to lower our immune system, allow pathogens and protagonist type organisms to create an imbalance, which I think is part of the challenge today with mold and fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, Lyme disease, all those micro parasitic and imbalances.
And Alzheimer's too.
And Alzheimer's too. Exactly.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about neuroplasticity, because I know you've done research and focused on that area. And I think that's just so important for people who don't want to get Alzheimer's. How do you focus and promote neuroplasticity?
Well, there's, a multitude of reasons why your neurotransmitters start to misfire or don't function as well as they did as a youngster. But if it's not the sheath around the myelin sheath that's covering the neuron, so the neurotransmitter, so that if the signal gets out, but the problem is it's not a strong enough signal from neuron to neuron, then that we can improve. And we use red light and near infrared frequencies for that. And there's been, just a ton of research in this area.
And when you say use both, I mean, is it one device? Is it two devices? Just so I understand.
Well, we developed one device that actually warehouses both of those wavelengths.
Right.
And again, remember,
right.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, do you give both wavelengths at the same time?
Yeah. So what I did, this is just on the physics or engineering part.
Sure.
I started to look at the near infrared frequencies that are being transmitted, that light wavelength that's being transmitted by an LED, a light emitting diode. And then I looked at light emitting diodes, and basically the whole industry until now, because I disrupted it a little bit, develops a LED that's called monochromatic, a single bulb with a single specific frequency. And what many of the competitors and other companies that make those devices, they create a cocktail or an array by offering, let's say, one row of 600 nanometer frequencies, a row of 800 nanometer, and a row of 900 nanometer. And then depending on the combination, how many of each of them, it creates a light cocktail in a way.
Right.
And then the body responds to that. And so when I looked at that, I said, well, why does a LED have to be monochromatic? Is that industry norm, or is there some actual engineering piece about that? And when I looked at it deeper, there wasn't anything engineering. It was really an industry norm. Someone decided to do it that way and created a whole, now it's great because I can sell, 20 times more of the light bulbs because they need one of each one in order to make my cocktail, right?
Right.
So, how many times have we seen that? So I actually developed an LED that we call a tri-light that has 3 wavelengths in one LED and one diode. And so what's interesting about that is if you give it enough power, I can actually generate 3 times the amount of biophoton energy, light energy, that is strong enough to pierce your skin and pierce that insulating layer of fat and actually affect each of your cells in your body, which is really the end game.
Right.
Because we are creatures that harmonize in nature, and we have a direct relationship to sunlight. You can't get around it. And so how do I bring the beautiful curated frequencies of sun energy that I know have been identified by science? NASA has identified it. A guy named Roy Reif has identified every wavelength and frequency that's associated with every organism in the body, and not in the body, but in nature. And so if I know what wavelength affects your body in certain ways, and I can harness those in one diode, and I can give it a fair amount of power, then I am creating the best delivery system to get these curated frequencies into the body, which is what we've done. And we call it a tri-light panel, very lightweight, very affordable. So you can stick it in your backpack. And we are in the process right now of doing TBI studies, traumatic brain injury studies, with a very famous neurosurgeon out of Tyler, Texas. And basically, we are seeing that we can heal people from concussions. Again, you've got this traumatic injury. Usually it's with ball players. So they get hurt. They have to use a third-party medical team that the management team of the, let's say, football team will use that third party to make sure that the player is okay before they can let them go back on the field.
Right.
That's usually a 6-week process. We've now got it down to 2 weeks when they have been approved to get back on the field. So that's a traumatic change or a tremendous advance in neuroplasticity, because the brain's reaction to being jarred through physical injury, the first thing it does is create swelling or edema coming in to try to analyze, what part of the lobe of the brain, where the disconnect is, and then try to figure out, is it acute or is it going to become chronic, and then readjust the new norm of whatever that definition of you is based on this change in your the effect in your brain or how your brain responds. And so for us to quickly connect those dots, or help reconnect those pathways, neural pathways, by using red and near infrared frequencies is a tremendous advantage for neuroplasticity.
That's very exciting, because one of the risk factors we see for Alzheimer's is previous brain trauma. And we could see it on PET scan, on the surface of the brain. So this is really exciting. And so you're doing research now with, I guess, a neurosurgeon in Texas. That is so exciting.
Yeah, it's just great stuff. So there's more to be revealed, but we are seeing amazing clinical results. And it's very inspiring because basically, we want to, I think that nature, our deliverer, intended us to live, pretty, established and vital from the first breath to the last. In the Western world, we've accustomed to sort of, as we get a little older, things start to break down, go to hospital, clinic, and then we just sort of retire in a place where we lose a lot of our cognition and a lot of our vitality per se. You step outside the US, like I've been fortunate because I actually had done some longevity studies and went to two of the blue zones in Asia where people live greater than 100 on average to try to understand what is their secret formula.
Like in Okinawa, etc. Yes.
Yeah, and there's a blue zone also in the in Italy. Like there's areas there too. And so that intrigued me because, longevity, vitality, these are all parts of the wishes that we all have. And particularly as you start to get a little older, it becomes a little bit more important that you focus in on the things that bring you joy and vitality, for the rest of your age, golden years. And so it was an interesting study for me. And what I discovered is that it's really about communing with nature. When I went to a blue zone in China, I traveled for 20 hours on a bus to the interior of China. And what I discovered, bringing some scientific devices with me, there was actually the village that I visited resided on top of a mound of blood orange tourmaline stone that generates wavelengths and frequencies that are what's called negative ions or earth energy that mirrors the abundance that you'd get if you were standing next to Niagara Falls, the energy of the falls, that power of the water going off the side of the falls will release these negative ions, which is basically earth energy. And that what that does to rebalance and support your immune system and your cell health is significant, which then goes back to my discussion a little earlier about Jerry Tennant and the body battery, body voltage. When you have an imbalance in cell voltage, it creates on a cell level now we're talking about, it actually creates a deficiency. The light doesn't shine quite as strong as it could.
Right. And when we say imbalance, I mean, just to be clear, I think normally our cells should be negatively charged. Did I remember that correctly?
To get the best communication, actually the cell should be neutral, meaning the same amount of positive as negative charge.
Okay.
In today's world, mostly in modern society, like living in controlled environments like your air-conditioned car, home, office, and so forth, we're surrounded by positive charged particles called cations, which affect our bodies. And so I can say categorically in an inner city or urban environment, most of us are our cells are more positive charge than negative charge.
Okay.
So what we need is earth charge, which is a negative charge or electron donor, in order for us to even out the charge of the cell so that it's balanced. And then we've got perfect cell communication. So imagine, I guess the best way for me to describe this, we're talking words now, and words are formed by letters. So imagine every cell had some letters missing in the words.
Right.
So they're trying to communicate, but they really can't communicate because there's a couple letters missing in the words, so they're not fully formed. And so they keep trying and they get part of it out, but I'm not sure what you said, cell. Can you please describe that a little further? Give me another word for it.
Right.
And so what the earth does, what negative ions do, what the sun does, is it supports you with an abundance amount of letters. So all the cells can form perfect words, and now they can better communicate, which supports your immune system, slows down the aging process, improves cognitive function. And so everything we're talking about today are attributes that every person listening that wants to know simple, inexpensive corrective measures to slow down the aging process, improve cognitive function, touch every family and individual that has Alzheimer's. These are keys and inexpensive ways to support your health.
Robby, we've covered so much. If you could just summarize, like, say, 3 points, what would you say the top 3 things that we've covered today?
Wow, you're right. We did cover a lot. So I'd say, being in South Florida, we're often told, don't go out in the sun because it's going to hurt your skin and you're going to get cancer or something like that. Our research shows much different results. So I think part of the big headers are get outside, commune with nature, allow your body to immerse in the macrobiome, the the organisms and the bacteria and the viruses and even the molds that live outside. So the environment outside your body and the one inside your body is somewhat synchronized. And I think that's a big key. Sunshine, certainly. The other bigger message is it doesn't have to be expensive to create that healing platform. It's about awareness. So creating a safe home where you can control, your air, water, and food, and then bring sunlight into the equation, I think is a really great place to start. It's simple, it's inexpensive. You won't believe there's more than 300 household chemicals in every average household in America that are potentially really harmful for us. But we rely on the Food and Drug Administration and for the companies to be, sort of morally and ethically bound to not put food sources or chemicals out there that we use commonly, that would hurt us. So I'm going to finish up just a couple of things.
Okay.
One of the worst household chemicals that people don't even realize is your laundry detergent. So you're washing your clothes. They have a scent or a fragrance in them, in the detergents and like a food coloring. So the coloring is carcinogenic. And then those scents that your clothing comes out smelling fresh, but you're basically putting those clothing on yourself, and these harmful chemicals that are not regulated are leaching from your clothes and the threads in your clothes into your skin, into your body.
Right. They're toxic, okay. and you're doing it yourself, basically.
So you can just take a quick inventory and you can replace some, with a little bit of education and research, you can replace a lot of the household chemicals that you take for granted with ones that are bioavailable and that are healthy for you and your family. Mostly the young kids, I'm concerned about that. We touched on EMF and exogenous frequencies, but the worst offenders actually come to the children, because between the years of 0 and 18, their neural pathways, their neurotransmitters aren't completely formed yet. And so when you take that very formulative stage in people's lives, young people's lives, and you immerse them in high concentrations of wireless networks and Bluetooth stuff, and the kids are carrying tablets now and cell phones. So they're bringing all of these man-made wavelengths directly to their body, directly to their brain. And that's actually, I think, one of the explanations why autistic rates are so high and continuing to skyrocket.
I think you're right. So, but just to summarize, even if you're doing everything you can correctly to try to minimize your exposure and that of your family, what are some of the tools that you can use to try to shield or push out some of these toxins? I know you've invented many of them, but what would say be your top 3 if you only if you only could take 3?
I mean, generally, or just about EMF?
I would say generally, but including, I think EMF is part of it.
Okay, so I love the infrared sauna. And this doesn't have to be ours, but I like infrared sauna because it mobilizes toxins and it also pulls the EMF that's being held in your cells. So if you find a good company, I like the infrared sauna because it helps pull out toxins, and it also lowers the cell concentration or the way the cell tissues hold on to EMF. So I think all that's important. I think focusing on things that bring a better night's sleep and maintaining your circadian rhythm is super important, because I've been fortunate that I've been close to some of the top nutritionists in the world, and they will tell me if they choose a better supplement or food source versus a better night's sleep, they'll always take a better night's sleep,
of course,
because of the regenerative. So think about the things that you can do simply in your home to create a better sleeping environment. So I think those are 2 important things that people should consider.
That's great. And Robby, if the audience wants to find you, what is your website and how can they find you on social media?
Right. So www.therasage, spelled THERASAGE.com, therasage.com. We have a very active Instagram account that's Therasage Infrared. So please take a look at that. I get a joy every day. It's the first thing I look at in the morning. These are not paid for infomercials. Okay. These are customers that are using our technology and putting it out there so people can understand the joy that it brings into their lives. So I love that one because it really validates what we're doing. So Instagram, we have a Facebook group. We have an 800 number, 888-416-4441. And then you can always write an email to customer service or info@therasage.com. These are all the ways to get a hold of us and get a hold of me. If you go on our website, you can actually on the top make an appointment to meet with one of our health advisors. They're free calls. Thank you so much, Dr. Josh.
Robby, this was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for taking the time and sharing this cutting edge information. It's just great. Such a pleasure.
Right. Same here.